Hi there, this is session 34 of Programming from the Very Basics using Python. In this session, we will learn how to perform file IO using Python. We will learn how to open files for reading and also for writing, and we'll deal with both text files and binary files and different patterns that it's best to follow in Python for working on files. Python has a built-in function, a very convenient one to deal with files. Just one moment, I need to select the kernel. I keep forgetting that. Sorry about that. Yep. All right, I need to turn this off. Yep. This open function acts like a factory method, I would say, because based on the parameters you pass, it will return basically two kinds of types. Two, or I would say maybe three types of objects. You might get a buffered reader, buffered writer, or a text IO wrapper. So, what does it mean? Well, when you're working with files in Python, there are two primary ways you can work with files, either dealing with binary files or with text files. So, which means you need to open a file in binary mode for dealing with raw binary data, or you can open the file in text mode for dealing with textual information. Now, what are the difference between this binary mode and text mode, if you might ask me? If you open a file in binary mode, whatever data you read would be in bytes format. I talked about byte strings. If you have skipped that, just go and look up the session where I do talk about bytes versus strings. And I talk about in the session where I talk about strings in Python, working with strings, right? So bytes object is mostly used for representing raw binary data. And if you're dealing with purely textual information, which can go through these Unicode encoding or localization, then you can open the file in text mode. And you can also specify what encoding to use if you prefer. Now, for now, let's say I have a file here in my machine, which is called, I think, readme.md, which is on my GitHub repository. So this entire folder is synchronized in my GitHub repository. So I do have a readme file here. So first I'll show you what that file contains. By the way, if you're using Anaconda Python and you're using Jupyter Notebook, there are interesting magic commands. Some of these might not work on Windows, so you want. So you can actually use something called %cat if you want to, and you can cat any file name, any file contents, any small files. You can just read them right away like this. So this is the contents of a file called readme.md. I think it's just few lines of it's just few lines. It's just like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines. Let's say I want to open this file using a Python program. What I would do is I can use open function. I can pass this file as an argument. Open takes a minimum of one argument, but you have an optional parameter that's the second argument, which might be quite important when you want to decide any other modes to open the file. By default, if you don't pass the second argument, by default, the file will be open for reading in text mode. So if you just call open this way, let me just represent this in a variable. I'll just say f is equal to open of readme.md. And if I show you what f is, let's say print f and type of f rather, you can very well see that if this file exists in the current directory and current folder, and this file is opened and returned what we call as an io.textIO wrapper object. In fact, you can see the class, what class this object belongs to. F represents an object which belongs to underscore io.textIO wrapper. That underscore io is just a way to say that you shouldn't be using that module directly. You should use the open function instead. It's just a way of discouraging the user from directly using this module. Right? That's the only reason why you have the underscore there. So if you look at this object, this particular object, which is an instance of text.io wrapper, when you get the string representation of it, it says as a text.io wrapper name is equal to what file it is opened and what mode it's opened on, and it also represents the encoding that it has used. So the encoding is by default determined based on what operating system you're running on. If you run this on Windows, I think you'll get a Win1252 or whatever that number is. You get a different encoding if you're running on Windows, by the way. So here, this file is being opened, and this file is open for read mode. There's a mode parameter that's there. I did not pass what mode to open the file in, so it's open for reading as a text file. You see an output as a text.io wrapper. When you try to print this file object, the file has been opened in text mode. That's what it means. Text.io wrapper is basically a wrapper that tries to do this translation from bytes to Unicode format based on the encoding you choose, right? Automatically, whether you open for reading or for writing. So that's why it's called as a wrapper, right? TextIO wrapper. Anyways, so when you open this file, you can perform some read operations at this moment. You cannot write to it because the file is open in read mode. And very important thing is that once you open a file, the operating system would allocate a file descriptor, right? So operating system will have a will sort of track that this program has opened a file, so it actually allocates a structure in its own memory, and we call them as file handles or file descriptors that the operating system maintains. So until you close this file, that file descriptor is not released or it's not freed. So it's always necessary that you must close your file in your program once you're done. If you exit your program, all the files that you would have opened in your program is automatically closed by the operating system. But if you have a long running program where you open a file, read some data, but you forget to close it, again you go back and open another file, read some data, you forget to close it, and maybe this runs in a loop. You're just opening files all over and you're not closing them. Eventually the operating system will give up and it might flag an error. So when you open way too many files, and how many files you can open is completely dependent on what operating system you run on, and also if you're working on Linux or Mac OS, it also based on some kernel tunable parameters. So there is a limit. The limit can be as small as 255 for simplistic systems. I'm not sure how it is in Windows. Very old version of Windows had a limitation of 255, I remember. Very old ones. I'm talking about the 2000 era. But I think they increased the number to something like 16,000 and odd now, hopefully. And on Linux, I think it is much higher. But we need to find out how many files I can open on my machine. Because I'm running on Linux, I think I can just find out by using maybe as root user. I might need to use sysctl. This I'm running on my Linux shell. This might not work on Windows. Just trying to show you. You can find it out. I think I can say it's called fs.max file. It's not called max files, I guess. It's called file max. Yeah. Oh, it's a very big number. It's a very big number. I think there's no shortage of memory on my system. So I think Linux, they set it up a very big value, but you might have some limitations. I think there's also another entry that might be relevant. Yeah, I think this will be the default limitation. There's a max value that you can set. So the maximum open files by the operating system is this much, but currently the limit is set to this number on my machine. If I try opening file this many number of times, you will get an error. I will try showing it to you maybe in the command line or here. Maybe I'll show you in IPython. Let me try writing a loop here. I'll just say maybe files is equal to an empty string, and let's say for I in range of, let's make it like say 1 million for now. Try opening a file 1 million times. Every time you try to open a file descriptor is allocated with OS. We'll try that. We can just try maybe f is equal to open off readme.md, the same file. I'm going to keep opening it in a loop 1 million times. And I'm going to add them into this files list so it doesn't get garbage collected by any means, right? The file object loses reference, it will be garbage collected, and during garbage collection, the file can be closed by Python itself. So I want to avoid that, so I'm going to append it to files. We'll see how many times it does that. Run this. You get this error very quickly, right? It escalated very quickly. I would say it said too many open files, readme.md. I want to find out how many files it did succeed opening. The way to find out is len of files. 1013. You can see IPython is now having a problem because IPython also opens its own history files to store whatever commands I type, whatever code I type in the IPython prompt into a history file, and it has no way to open that file. So it hit an unexpected error. You can see that history saving thread hit an unexpected error, operational error, unable to open database file. History will not be written to database. Yes. So these are limitations. You try in any operating system, there are limitations. That files NR is, I think it's a system-wide limitation, but I think a per process limitation also exists, which is set to this number. So if you try opening files beyond this, you can see it fails. So there's no way you can open any files anymore at this moment. So the only thing you need to do now is you need to close all these files or you can exit your Python shell. Therefore, all the files opened by this process will automatically be closed by the operating system. So there's something that you should keep in mind. So the best way to handle files, is you need to open a file and close it. When you have a long piece of code, you open a file in a function and you're doing some processing, and the function raises an exception without closing it. So the close is there somewhere below in the function, but the function just exited midway with an exception, and maybe you're handling that exception and you're calling this function in a loop. Perhaps this can happen, where you can run out of file descriptors and there would be no way programmatically to close it. After that, maybe you would have lost references to those objects. That's also very likely. So the best practice to work with files in Python is to use a context management expression or context management statement. We call this with clause. You always use with, open, off. I'll just keep the earlier code sort of commented off like this, right? There's a manual way to open a file. If you open a file like this, you need to call ef.close in order to close it. Let me close this file here. Remember, there's a different process. That's a different process. So I think what happened in that process should not affect this one. There's a per process limitation for safety in most OSs, like Linux, for example. In this case, what I'll do is I can just use for fn files. I can say f.close. This is how you close all the files. Now you're okay. You can open any more files. So number of file descriptors that the operating system is maintaining for this is reduced tremendously, right? Okay. Anyways, I'm going to exit this prompt. Now coming back here, I said f.close. You try to call f.close one more time. Oh, it doesn't raise any exceptions anymore. You know, sometimes you get an exception. You used to get an exception like trying to close an already closed file. It just ignores it. But nevertheless, here in this code, I always use with open of readme.md, the file name, whatever file name. And by the way, that's a string there, and the string can be a proper path. So if your file is not in your current directory, it's elsewhere, you can represent it with your path, be it your Windows path or your Linux path. I think even if you use Windows, you can still use /, not the backslash, /, right? / is this. You can use this / for your path separator. It still works. I just checked it up in all the modern version of Windows. You don't have to use necessarily backslashes. The more you start using backslashes, you need to put double backslashes to escape one backslash to the other, or use raw strings or R strings if you can represent true Windows path with backslashes inside them, right? If you're using Windows, be sure of that. But if you use a /, it still works without a problem. I think shouldn't be an issue. So here the file is found in the current directory. So I'm just opening that file. And because I'm not passing the second parameter, it's going to be opening for read mode. So I'm going to say as, I'm going to use maybe as f. It's a simple variable I'm using. And then inside this block, there's a compound statement. So inside this block, when I say with open of this particular file as f, inside the block, I'm printing f. There's another attribute. I can just say f dot, okay, and I'll put it in the next line. The print f dot closed. You'll get in the second line. Closed. It is not a method. It's just an attribute. Okay, it's a data attribute. There's a boolean. This will return true or false, indicating whether a file is closed or not. So here I'm trying to indicate that in with block. And let me just use a nicely formatted letter string here. I'll use f string. I don't know, f and f here is confusing. So I'll do one thing. I'll just call this as readme file. So make it more intuitive. Here I can use readme file dot closed. Outside the with clause. There's outside the with clause. It's going to use outside with block readme file dot closed equals to show you whether it's open or closed. Try running this. You can see that inside the with block, the closed attribute shows up as false. That means the file is open. But the moment you exit the with clause, the file is automatically closed for us. We don't have to worry. And this also ensures that even if there is an exception inside this code block, which will lead to it exiting this block for any reason, whether it's through exception or if you're exiting gracefully, in both circumstances, this file will be closed. That's a use of with clause. In fact, this with block is equivalent to something called as try finally block, which I will discuss perhaps in the next session, right? So talk about exception handling. So this is just a convenient way to manage contexts. So with is a context manager. A file that's opened is like a context. It's a context. A file is open, you need to close it. So as long as it's open, you can invoke certain methods and read files or write to a file. The moment it's closed, you cannot perform read and write anymore. So there's a context called open close. Even when you're dealing with sockets, you have something called connect disconnect or connect and close, or you have databases or all of these things, network sockets, databases, and files which have a context, or even locks when you deal with threads or processes. For synchronization, you might use locks, mutex locks, right? So you can use lock.acquire and lock.release. So these maintain context, and all of these objects are with clause compatible. So you can use them in with clause. And if they're with, call an expression, which could be a construction or any other form, which opens up a context, which creates a context, and then you execute that block. As long as the context is there, the moment you exit, it'll undo it. Basically, it'll release it or it'll close it in this case, right? So the file is opened the moment you call open of readme.md, and after the as whatever variable name you put in here, that's an identifier, the result of this expression is assigned to this identifier, and then this block is executed. The moment you try to exit this block, it'll automatically close the file. The file is already open. With clause knows how to do that. All of these objects have some special methods called enter and exit. So when it's entering the context, enter method is called, which will open the file. The moment you exit this block, you're exiting the context. So therefore, the file is automatically closed via exit method in it. So there are two special methods available, the dunder methods. That's what is invoked. So this is how we open and close a file. But now here's the thing. There are different patterns when you're dealing with file IO here. So one, you might want to, okay, let me just take this out from here, put it here, yeah. You might want to read, let's say, small files. Reading small text files. If you're reading small text files, there are two possible ways you can read them. Most small text files are opened and fully read into memory. That's what you do. When I mean the word small, a file that you can safely, whose contents can be safely accommodated in your computer memory. If a file is like say kilobytes in size, or maybe a couple of megabytes, and you have a lot of RAM on your system, you can slurp the file. You can just read the entire file into RAM. It's more convenient to do that. And there's a pattern that's followed for reading, let's say, config files, very small text files, which run to kilobytes or maybe a megabyte, source code. If you want to just process source code and all that, you can just slurp the file. Slurping is like read the entire file contents into RAM. And how do you do that? There are two strategies you can use. One, you can read these files as a string completely. To do that, you could use with open of readme.md as, I can just type maybe in file, for example. I can give any variable name I want. File this you want to read in, right? Input file. And you could actually read the entire contents of the file into a string by just using this idiom. Contents is equal to infile.read. Open returns a file object, which is text IO wrapper that you see. And these objects have read, read line, read lines, write, write lines method. There's 5 methods exist. 5 methods exist. When you invoke read and don't pass any argument to it, it reads the entire file. If you just opened it, reads the entire file into memory, into a string, and the string is assigned to contents. So when you now go and print contents, the entire file contents are shown here. You can see this. This is the file contents which I had. That's what is printed here. It's just a few lines. You can read any file that way. Maybe is there any file I have here? So I think I I just go to my command line. Let's say ls. I can see a lot of files in here. I can read any source code. Maybe I'll try to read, let's say, there's a file called license also, I guess. It's automatically added by GitHub. And try to sync this into the GitHub repository. It's called license. It could have more lines. So I can actually also read that with open of license. Remember, these paths can be case sensitive based on underlying operating system. On Linux is case sensitive. I'm not sure about macOS. macOS has both case sensitive mode and case insensitive mode. Check out the mode accordingly and use it. Windows is case insensitive, so it doesn't matter whether the file names are in upper or lowercase. So it varies based on operating system. So I just open this file, open of license as in file again. I can just say data is equal to in file.read. And if I try to print type of data, you can see it's a string object. And if I try to print data, the entire file contents is shown up as a single string, as a multi-line string. So if you want to do any kind of string manipulation in it, you can do it right here. Maybe I can check whether it's got a word. Maybe I want to find out in this entire file, there's a word, let's say a word called commercial. I can see that right here. So I want to know how many times this word commercial repeats, let's say. So I can say, how do you find out how many times a substring repeats in a string? Do you remember? String methods. Yeah, I know. It can be a long time after you watch my session on working with strings. Then you might recollect, what is it? What is it? Yeah, never mind. If you just do if you're using something like VS Code, of course, when you say print of data dot, you can see all these other methods. Which method do you think do you want to use for finding out how many times a substring occurs in a string? There's a huge list of methods. And the method has gone all the way on top. It's count. So you can just say count of, what do you want to count? Let's say the word commercial. How many times is occurring? It occurs twice. Maybe even in a non-commercial, commercial is found. Maybe you want to look for a string called maybe PHE. I don't think this word exists in this entire license document. Let's search for an obvious suspect. GNU? No, it's not a GNU license, I guess. Maybe I'll search for license. Oh, it's found once. Maybe some simple prepositions like is. It's not really a preposition. Is can be a part of this also. Yeah, that will occurrence of it. You can see that. Yeah, you can do all this kind of analytics if you want by using string methods. So this is how you read small text files. But sometimes you want to read small text files and you want to access line-wise, because most text files are organized line-wise, right? You write first line, second line, third line, multi-lines. So I want to read, let's say, first 10 lines of a file, or maybe I want to read line number 5 to line number 10, something like that. So if you want to process text files line by line and read them, the way you can do that is, okay, I think I duplicated this a lot of times, yes. I can open this file as usual, and here I can type read lines. There's also a method called read line, which will just read one line at a time. But I'm using read lines here. Read line is a legacy method. It's just there for legacy reasons. You don't have to use it. Come to that. Okay. So if you say data is equal to in file.read lines this time, look at type of data. It's a list. If you try to print data as is, you get a list of lines. And also note, each line also includes a new line character. The lines are not stripped. So every line will end with a new line, right? The /n that you see there, right? So it's got a list of lines. So if you want to know how many lines are there in this file, you can actually find out the length of this list and you know how many lines exist. Rather than calling it data, I'd like to make it more intuitive. So I'm going to rename this variable as lines. Remember, it's just a variable name, right? I would just type of lines, which is nothing but a list. And I can just print lines. And len of lines. Len of lines will tell me how many lines it is. Let me put it on the second line because I think this list is anyway going to scroll all the way to the right. So I'll just put len of lines here. Oh yeah, there are 24 lines in this file. Now let's say I want to read the last line of this file. or the last 5 lines of this file, how do you do that? It's pretty straightforward. You can just say for I in, you can just type lines of -5 colon, right? And I can just print I. That prints the last 5 lines. Oh yeah, there are last 5 lines. You know why? Even the blank lines are counted. There's a blank line here. There's line 1. One line is blank. That's second line, then third line, then fourth line, then fifth line. There are a lot of blank lines in the middle. So maybe you want to strip out all the blank lines. You want to remove all the blank lines. Is there a way to do that? How do you know what's a blank line? A blank line is a line that only has a new line character in it. You can see this. So how do you strip out all these blank lines from this file? Can you guess any ways to do that? By the way, this code, you don't have to write this for loop. I'll tell you another way to do it is you can also do it in a simple expression. You can also do it like this. I'll copy this line and I'll copy the cell anyways. Instead of writing this for loop, which I will leave as commented here. Shouldn't do this in production, by the way. Okay, just warning you again. It's just for giving you a reference for learning. So I could directly say double quotes dot join of, I could just type lines of colon, I can say -5 colon. The last 5 elements of a list is what I get here. So when I print it, you can see the outcome. The last 5 lines. There's a blank line here. So let's say I want to get rid of this blank line. I don't want this blank lines at all. What do? You can use a comprehension here where you can filter out all the blank lines and then get the slice of it. So the way you can do that is you can use a comprehension expression within parentheses. No, I think comprehension with parentheses might not work. You're going to use generator. You can apply slice on the generator. So use a list, no problem. I can say create a list where I could just use maybe line for line in lines. I would not want to call a variable like this because lines, sometimes you can just misspell it very easily. So I'll just leave it as simple. I just type li for line in lines if li dot strip. For strip a line, it gets rid of all the leading and trailing white spaces, and what's left is only the text. When you strip a blank line, it becomes an empty string. Strip a blank line, it becomes an empty string. All the new lines are removed. What remains is an empty string. And if it's an empty string, this condition is going to be false. So I'm just going to use this. Yep. The last 5 lines after stripping all the blank lines out. You can get the first 5 lines. All you need to do is just say :5 here. Get every alternate lines if you want, :2. Get every fifth line, :5. You can do all those list slicing techniques or sequence slicing techniques with this because the written value is ultimately a list, right? So these are the benefits you get when you are able to read a small file into a list, right? So you can do that by using that read lines method. Remember, when you use read method, it reads the entire file into a string. What you get is a string. You can apply string methods on them. But if you want to process line wise and do some extra work, like say maybe get the last 5 lines or get alternate lines and get the first 5 lines and all that, you're better off reading it as a list of lines. So if you want to read a text file as a list of lines, then you can use read lines method. There's also another method called read line. It's a legacy method. I will just show you what it does. I'm going to manually open the file, run this a couple of times, and then close it this time. Let's say open off the same file, license. This time, I'm just going to call this as infile is equal to this. This file is now opened. Now, if I just type infile.readline, it reads the first line. Run this cell another time, it reads the second line. That means you keep calling read line in a iterative way. It reads line by line. So you can see it reads the second line. It's blank. Third line, fourth line, fifth line, sixth line, seventh line, eighth line. It goes up. Let's say I want to print all the file contents line wise, every line, along with their line numbers. How do you do it? I want to print the entire contents of this file. So if at all I want to print contents of this file, one of the ways I can do that is I can actually use read into a list, right? I can just say with open of license as I can just provide in file. Whatever file I opened earlier, I'm better off to close it. So I'll just create another cell. I just type in file.close this time, because when you manually open a file, it's safer to close it. Now here, I'm going to say open of license as in file. And in here, I'm just going to read lines is equal to in file.read lines. It reads everything, slurps the entire file into a list of lines. Now when I do a for, s in lines, for example, and try to print s, you know what you get? Each line being printed. By the way, print adds a new line. The line also has a new line. Print automatically ends everything with a new line. So that's the reason why you can see more spaced out contents, because one new line is part of the string, another new line is added by the print function at the end. So if you don't want print to add ending new line at this moment, because there's a new line already embedded in every string in here, you could actually do that. You can just type end is equal to empty string this time. But I want to print not just every line, but I want to print along with their line numbers. Can you just try it out? You can use any file. If you have somehow used Git to synchronize my repository, you can also use this license file. It will work. How do you do it? Well, you can pause the video and try it out. Think, and then try get back. All right. If you got back to my video after you tried it out, this is what you should have done, right? The way you do that is, as you can see, enumerate. But the problem with the enumerate is that it starts indexing from 0. It starts from 0, right? You want to start from 1. So you can just use 1 here. And this time, you can use I comma s, let's say. Let's call that index. And I can just use I and s. Yeah. Yeah, there's a minor inconvenience that you see here. You can see this spacing out. Doesn't look nice, right? If you want to nicely organize it, if you sort of estimate how big this file is, maybe we anyway read the entire file into lines. We can find out the len of lines. I think it prints 24, which is 2 digits. Now, how do you get 2 digits spacing here? So maybe when you read this file contents, maybe it had about 1,000 lines. It written something like, say, 1,550 lines or something. Then the number can have 1550 or something. That means 4 digits. So how do you find out how many digits are there in a number? How do you find out how many digits are there in a number? Suppose if I give a number here, it's like a detour. Just think about this. So I have a number here, which is an integer. I have like 1520, for example. How do you find out the number of digits in this integer? If you just print a, it's going to show you this number. But is there a way to find out the number of digits in it? Or some of you might wonder, how about len of a? Len won't work because len works only on a collection. It doesn't work on an integer, right? So how do you make this work? Well, it's pretty straightforward. Get the string representation of this integer and find out its length. Done. Right? If you have done some programming in academics, they will tell you to divide by 10, count the number of times you can divide by 10, and that count will tell you the number of digits. That's the algorithm you have to solve it. But you have to always think pragmatic when you're writing code in Python, because there are ready-made functions and constructs that can make things easy for you. It's better to leverage that. Remember, when you think like a Python star, You don't build things from scratch all the time. You want to see what's available in Python, the standard library, the built-ins, and so on. Or once you get more expertise, you also look for third-party libraries, but at least at a standard library level, or also the built-ins, and see how to use these constructs and functions to solve a problem without having to write logic completely on your own. And that's how you do it. So you convert a string or convert a number to a string. I mean, you create a string out of a number. You get all that's converted anyways as a string. So the string will have 4 characters. That's what you count by using len. So I can use that as a way to do some formatting. So here, I find out the length first. I just say, padding is equal to, how much padding I need to use is equal to len of lines. I want to add another extra space after the number, so I'm going to use +1. No, it's not len of lines, right? Len of lines will give me a number. Len of lines will give me a number, but that will be 24. No, it will not. This will make it 25. I want to find a number of digits in that number. So to find a number of digits in the number, the way you do that is len of str of len of lines +1. Don't write code like this. Why? Because the moment you say function or function or function or something, it looks like an onion peel and it gets too very messy. So by the time you start figuring out what each layers do, it's like peeling an onion and it'll only bring tears to your eyes. So don't do this. So when you have a lot of these kind of complex code, it's perfectly okay to make it in multiple lines. Don't shy away from writing multiple lines of code. Readability is important. So first thing you do is you can find out, n digits, number of digits equals, first I'll find out the length of this, okay? N lines equals len of lines. We got to know how many lines are there. And then I can say n digits equals len of str of n lines. And then padding is equal to n digits +1. There is absolutely nothing wrong in adding multiple statements like this if it's going to make sure you're focused on readability. Some people might argue and say, oh, this looks too verbose. I can do it in a single line. Yeah, you might be super smart. You can do that. But somebody is going to read your code, should be able to immediately figure out what it's doing. So you can say, oh, n lines is n len of lines, and this is equal to len of str of n lines. Okay, convert it string, convert to length. That's okay. And then you say padding is equal to n digits +1. This is more intuitive or readable. Follow this. And then the next thing is obviously here. I enumerate these lines starting with 1. This time I can use the format literal string syntax where I could actually use I. Okay. I want to print I with some padding. It's a colon, n digits. Like this. And followed by S. Not sure if I need to use n digits +1 because I'm anyway adding a space in this format string. So I can just, maybe you can forget about this. I can just use n digits. That's enough. So I can say I colon n digits. I guess you know that that's the padding form. The number, right, will represent how much of spaces should you want to pad this field to. And after which, oh, sorry, I think I did something. And then run this. Oh, there's a value error here. What's the value error? Oh, it says invalid format specify n digits. There is a problem. It's I colon this n digits, right? It must be a number. That's strange. Let's see if I can use another nested member here like this. I know it's a little hacky. If it's an I colon, what is expected is a number. But if you want to substitute the value of a variable in that number, you use one more curly braces and substitute the value of n digits. You can nest curly braces like this. I think the syntax is supported in recent versions of Python. I don't know if it's supported in Python 3.6. I need to verify that. I guess it is a feature from Python 3.9, having nested curlies inside your template string. I need to verify that. Let me just check and let you know later on. But you can see that it's nicely organized. Numbers are anyway right justified, and you have a very clean output format that you see here. Right? So you can see I'm able to print the contents of the file along with its line number. So all this is possible, right? Now I told you how to read text files, which are small text files. But many times when you're doing some kind of analytics or doing any kind of text processing in Python, you might be dealing with very large files. Files that you cannot just read entirely into memory. It may not be feasible to read entirely in memory. But I don't have such large files on my machine at the moment because my machine has got about 60, I think it's 32 gigabytes of RAM. Yeah, filling that up would be a nightmare, right? I don't have such a big text file which can take up the entire RAM, right? 32 gigabytes. No, it doesn't do that. But it's just a pattern I'm going to show you, which you can apply for large scale projects when you're working on extremely large files. So the problem is, instead of reading the entire file into memory, you can start processing a file line by line. How do you do that? Now, here's an interesting fact that you should know about file opened for reading. When you open a text file for reading, here's an important thing to know is that a file open for reading is an iterable and it's also an iterator. I'll show you that. So I'm going to say with open of the same file, right now license as in file this time. Now if I just do a print iter of license, in file, did not throw any exception. Iter returned itself. It's an iterable come iterator, which also means that you can directly use a for loop on a file open for reading in text mode. And what happens when you use a for loop? This will invoke next method every time. When you invoke next method on this file in file, it runs the next line. So next of in file is equivalent to in file.read line. It's the same. So if you want to process a large file and read line by line, one line at a time and process it in a very memory efficient manner, this is a pattern to follow. Reading and processing large text files line by line in a memory efficient manner. I'm just going to continue the next line in here. So it's gone way off here. Let me just do that. Line by line in a memory efficient manner. And this is a pattern to follow. So you can say with open of licenses. Remember, some people who are beginners, mostly they ask these kind of questions. So can I put a variable there? Yeah, obviously, it's a string. You're passing a string as an argument, so it can be stored in a variable. You can also get it from user input if you want to. You can say, file name is equal to, or file path is equal to input of enter file name to open. You can use input function, get it from a user, and pass that variable. All of that will work. Okay, so whenever I'm using a string object or number, you should know that you should be able to substitute them with a variable in which you would assign that value. Okay, so here I open this file, and this time I can process it line by line by simply using this loop for line in file. It looks very simple and elegant in Python. Open a file for line in file. Now I can print each line, maybe convert uppercase, and I'll not have a end delimiter for print. It basically iterates over this file and prints each line in uppercase. If you want to use enumerate, that'll also work. Remember this, I showed you the small file, but I'll not show it in the Jupyter notebook because this might crash my VS Code perhaps. This is not meant for large files to be opened. I'll show it to you in my command line. There's a file I have on my Linux system, which is my system logs, which is quite big. I can show you ls-l/var/logs/syslog. There's a path on my machine. So quite a big file. I think it's about 7.5 megabytes mostly. I can use ls-lh. So yeah, It is 7.2 MB. You can see that. It's a quite big file. If I just use my Linux command, let's say cat/var/log syslog, you can see it just shows a lot of things. If you want to find out how many lines are there, I think in Unix you can use wc-l. Oh yeah, there are 54,307 lines in this file. Not really big, but for our consideration, let's assume that it's a big file. You can process this line by line. Maybe what I'm going to do is that from this log file, I want to print only those lines that has the word error. That's got the word error. Anywhere if you see the word error, I want to print that line alone. Right? So I want to do that using Python. So the way I can do that is, let me write a small file here, and I'm going to run that, the command line. So I'll just create a new file here. It's a Python file. And here, this time I'm going to show you, I didn't talk about this. If you are building Python scripts to be run on command line on Unix environments, if you're using Windows, you can sort of ignore it. But if you're going to be running Python on a Unix command line, be it Linux or Mac OS, or maybe your Windows subsystem for Linux, because Linux is kind of environment there. Sometimes you want to make it an executable program directly, not a binary executable, a script executable. If you want to do that, it's a better idea to have a script signature that starts off like this. This must be the first two characters of your file, by the way, !! They call this as a shebang sequence, or they call them a script prologue, right? So every executable scripts will start with this prologue with a path to the Python binary. So in my machine, the Python binary, I don't know where it is, right? It's installed in Anaconda, but I don't know the path. The right way to use the current Python in your environment settings would be to use this user bin env space Python. So this will end up using my Anaconda Python, because Anaconda could be set up in the path to run Python. So I don't know the path to Anaconda. I don't remember it. So I can just use this. So it's going to find out Python from the environment path and use that. And then after that, I could actually use, remember, this signature is common with reminiscent with shell scripts, Perl scripts, TCL scripts, and all kinds of text script executable, awk, you name it, right? You can have the script signature, path to the interpreter, that is. If you don't remember the path to the interpreter, but the interpreter is configured in your system path anyways, you can always use user bin env and the name of the interpreter. In this case, I'm using Python, out of which I want to process command line arguments. And I told you how to do that. So you would normally use import argparse. But rather than using argparse this time, because I taught you about from module import member, I can say from argparse module, I'm interested in argument parser. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to write the main boilerplate here. I'm trying to write the good coding conventions now. So far I didn't do it, but now it's a time to get learning with these things, because whenever you write a program that has to run as a main program, as a script, as a program that you want to run like a command, you always follow this pattern, right? And here you want to do this. You want to say parser is equal to argument parser. Okay, an important thing. I would want to remove this from here completely and put it here. Some people will argue about this. The Python coding style guidelines called PIP8. I will talk about it when I talk about Python code maintenance. I'll give you a full run through on it, right? This kind of code is not recommended as per PIP8, but honestly, I would violate PIP8 for this. This is the only thing that I don't follow from the PIP8 convention. That's me. But if you want to strictly follow PIP8 convention, you want to put this import right in the beginning. But why I'm not doing that? See, I need to load this module only when you run this as a script, as a main program. But if I want to use this as a reusable module in another code base, then I don't need this, right? So what I do here is a parser is equal to argument parser of, you can pass some kind of documentation for this. I think it's, I keep forgetting the parameters for argument parser. What's it called? Does it autocomplete? Yeah, it's called program none description. description is equal to, I can just call this as program help. And this program help would just be a big doc string, which I'm going to create on top. Or I can say program description. And just say a simple Python program, Python script to print contents of a large file. Again, maybe you can say print lines that match a substring in a large file. That's it. I'm just going to make it multi-line. So I'm going to pass this as the content. You know, when you start a triple quote strings, don't use a new line like I did here. So you want to continue in the same line and maybe add a line break and add in the next line, maybe if you want to do that. And here, let me call this description as program description. I need to take two arguments in parser. It's a parser dot add argument of, I'm just going to take first argument as file name, and the documentation for it, what is it called? Is it called doc or help? Yeah, help is equal to, I can say file name to parse. I don't know how it ran here. File name to parse. And this file name, I wanted to make sure the type is a string. So the type is equal to str. It's a string object. Also say parser dot add argument of, and I want to get to know about the actual substring I want to match. I can say maybe search. Type is equal to str for now, and help is equal to search string. So I think it makes sense to put the search string first and the file name at the end. I'm just trying to follow some conventions as reminiscent in Unix. Okay, so, and yes, some of you might ask, oh, will this use regular expressions? No, we are not going to do that right now. It's a substring match. The moment we talk about text processing in Python, that could be another series of session again, which runs to a couple of sessions, another series that I'll talk about how to use regular expressions and all the good practices in text processing. There I'll explain that, right? For now, we're just going to use a simple substring match. So these are the arguments I'm interested in. And I would say args is equal to parser dot parse underscore args. And now what I'm going to do, to parse these arguments, I want to call the actual function which does all the processing. I can say search of args dot search in args dot file. Args is an object that will represent all of these arguments you mentioned as attributes, right? It's going to take care of that. And the search is a function that I'm going to create here. Def search of, let's say, substring in file. And this is where I'm going to open the file. Let's say with open off file name as in file, and I'm going to process line by line. So say for line in file, I can use if substring in line print. Maybe you want to add some intuitivity. I want to print the line number also. So if you want to do that, you can also use n comma line in enumerate of in file comma start from 1, and the substring is found in the line. Then you can actually print the line number. So I can just say n colon n comma line. This will do. Is roughly 20 lines of code, and the actual logic is not very complex. You just open the file for reading, and you get to access this as infile or infile. That's a variable that represents the open file object. Then you iterate over each line of the file. But when you're iterating over it, you also want to enumerate. So you want to get the number, the line number, like line number 1, line number 2, the line for that. And if that line has a substring, only then print it. Otherwise, it's just going to ignore it. So with this code, am I missing something here? Some parenthesis or something missing here? I'm not sure. Oh, what happened to my, oops, my cursor, my keyboard is not working. Oh, okay. I think I tried to save it. Just wondering what's going on. Yeah. I'll just call this as search string in file. Yeah, I made it a very long name over here. It's fine. Yeah, all these are warnings that VS Code will print because I didn't use a docstring and I didn't call program description as a variable. It says use uppercase naming constant. I'll talk about all these when I talk about Python code maintenance. And there's no docstring in here. That's what it is. And yeah, I think it's fine. Let me try to run this. If I want to run this, I can use Python search string in file.py. If I don't pass any argument, it throws this error. It takes 2 arguments, search and file name. I need to pass them, right? You can actually make it executable on Unix, that's Linux or macOS, in the command line in the shell. This for Linux users or macOS users. You can chmod +x search string in file. I can run this like a normal script. If this was added in your system path anywhere, maybe your scripts folder, which might be in your environment path, you can run it like a normal command now. We just built a small command line tool. And when I say search string in file, if I just provide, let's say, I want to search for the word error in, if I give some file name that doesn't exist, I'm giving some wrong path here. You can see this. With open a file name, no such file or directory, and so on. In the next session, this file IO is not going to complete in this 1 hour. So I'm going to continue another session. I'm going to go more detail into it, but I'll tell you some of the practices you should follow. Most people have the habit of checking whether a file exists using if condition with some APIs. Maybe you can say os.path.exists and all that, or you can use a pathlib module and check for file's existence and then try to open the file. Don't do that. That is a sure shot of failure, because the moment you check whether a file exists, at that moment it will say the file is there. But before you open it, maybe somewhere else, some other terminal, somebody just deleted the file. So the file test says the file is there, but the next statement before you open it, concurrently, parallelly, in some other terminal, maybe the file is rotated or deleted. It can fail. So use the exception mechanism. Just blindly try opening the file. If it fails with an exception, handle it gracefully. So we need to handle exception, which will improvise the next level after a while. But for now, you can see it shows no such file or directory and so on. And I need to pass the right path here. There's obviously a wrong path. If you want to know the help for this, obviously you can say -h. So all that description and everything comes up. Let me just show you this again. Usage. This is a program description, which I passed to argument parser. And all these are help for these parameters I passed. So it's a nice command line utility with all these things being shown up. So now I can use search string in file.py, the word called error in var log syslog. I know this path exists. It's found them in all these lines. Every one of these lines has got the word error. Do you see this? Main decoder error, main decoder error, main decoder error. Oh yeah, that's my OBS Studio lagging off a lot of error, which is right now recording the screen. So it's anyway going through, though with all these errors. Yeah, you can see a whole lot of them. You can see how many errors are there. So you can search for any substring if you want. So all this kind of processing can be done on a very large file. Imagine this does not read the entire file into memory. It just tells the operating system open the file. Then tells you OS, give me one line, give me another line, give me another line. Actually, it does not read line by line from an OS. It'll read up to a kilobyte or 4 kilobyte or whatever the IO block size. Different OSs have different ways to transact with files, different size that's used for transaction. So most of the times in Unix environments, it'll read the IO block size into a buffer, and that buffer is tokenized as lines and given to us. Once that buffer runs out, it gets the next chunk from the file, then tokenizes lines and gives it to us. So this is what is being done. But at any given point in time, this is not memory intensive because we are not slurping the entire file into RAM. So when you're dealing with extremely large text files, this is a pattern that I recommend following, right? So I told you how to read small text files. I told you how to read large text files in this video, right? But the next video, the next session, I will talk about how to deal with binary files and how do you write to files and how do you open the file in append mode and a little bit of seek and tell. So I'll give you some examples on them. So you'll understand all the different file usage patterns when I cover all these things, and you'll have more clarity on what forms should you use or what technique should you use to deal with different kinds of files. So with that being said, I will end this video here. So I hope you learned something useful. I told you how to read text files in Python in this particular session. Without a very small utility, you can improvise this, can add features to it. Anyways, so I showed you how to read text files. I told you how to slurp an entire file into memory. If the file is small, you can read it as a string or you can read it as a list of lines, and we can do some processing on that. But if you're dealing with extremely large files, which are textual in nature, the best way to read it is to open the file and then use a for loop, which provides an iteration algorithm. Now, as an exercise for you people to try out, try and see whether you can optimize this code. Try and see if you can optimize this code. Let me know, right? Hint, comprehensions. See if you can use comprehensions and let me know if the comprehensions actually makes it easier to read, or is it okay to have a for loop here? That's up to you. Just try and see how we can solve it. If you find a solution, just you can post your solutions on the comments, or you can also share it to me to my email ID, and yeah, I will have a look into it and I'll give you my feedback on that, right? All right then. So I hope you found this entire session useful. So if you do like this video, do hit the like button, and if you have not subscribed to my channel, please do subscribe so you can get notification on more videos like this as I post them. And I will see you in the next session. Thank you very much. See you there.